While crossing to the Asian side of the Bosporus Strait, Darius left Megabazus, now one of his generals, in charge of a large portion of the army in Europe, with instructions to conquer all peoples he came across on his way to subjecting Thrace. Thrace is found in modern-day Bulgaria, largely. Herodotus gives us his description of the Thracian people's customs, which seem to be mainly centered on birth, sex, and war. Darius himself returned to Sardis in Lydia, and rewarded Histiaeus, the Ionian tyrant that rescued him, and Coes, the general that advised him not to destroy the bridge in the first place. Both asked for their reward to be installed as tyrants, in Histiaeus' case, the tyrant of an additional city, and both requests were granted. While in Sardis, Darius observed a woman acting very unusually. She was leading a horse, carrying water, and using a spindle all at the same time. He sent for her, and her brothers came too. The brothers had put their sister up to this performance in order to arouse Darius' interest and get themselves installed as tyrants of their people, the Paeonians. After learning that all the Paeonian women were supposedly just as industrious as this one, Darius ordered Megabazus to deport every last one of them into Asia. Between Paeonia and Thrace lies Macedonia, so Megabazus sent a delegation there too, to ask for earth and water, again, the symbolic tokens of submission, by which you would acknowledge the king of Persia as your master. The Macedonian king, Amintas, feared the Persians, and so he immediately submitted to them. He entertained his guests, that is, the Persian delegation sent to ask for earth and water, quite generously at his palace. At one point during the festivities, they asked him to observe the Persian custom of sending all the Macedonian concubines and wines in the house into the room to dine with them. The women arrived, and the Persians began to fondle them. Amintas did nothing, for he was terrified of resisting them. However, his son, Alexander, was not afraid. He encouraged his father to go to bed, then took charge of the guests. Alexander then told his exceedingly drunk Persian guests that these women would be theirs for the night, but first they needed to go off to bathe. The women left the room, and a few minutes later, the same number of beardless, clean-shaven men, all concealing daggers, entered the room dressed in women's clothing. The Persians did not notice this ruse until it was too late. After Alexander hid the bodies, the carriages, and everything else the Persians had brought with them, Darius sent out a search party to find them. Alexander bribed the leader of this search party that inevitably arrived with gold and his sister's hand in marriage. This Alexander of Macedonia will come back throughout the rest of the histories. He is also the ancestor of Alexander the Great. Histiaeus traveled to his new city in Thrace and began fortifying it. Megabazus noticed this and sent a message to Darius. He thought Histiaeus was far too clever to be allowed free rein in such an advantageous place as he was given. He could easily rebel, and he must be kept away from any other Greeks. Darius agreed with this assessment and invited Histiaeus to be his personal advisor at Susa. Histiaeus believed that this was a genuine offer and willingly went to be kept peaceably by Darius. For now. Artaphernes and Otanes, two of Darius's officials, then took control of all the coastal cities and conquered a number of Ionian city-states in the area as well. Histiaeus had left his cousin Aristagoras in charge of his two cities. During a joint invasion of Naxos by this same Aristagoras and reinforcements from Persia, he had a falling out with the Persian commander. To retaliate, this commander tried to ensure Aristagoras was humiliated by failure during the invasion, so that he would probably be removed from power as a result. Sensing this possibility, Aristagoras contemplated starting a rebellion against Darius. At the very same time, a message arrives from Histiaeus, urging him to do that very thing. Histiaeus had sent this message because he now hated being kept in Susa. Of course, he didn't mention that that was his reason in the message. The message itself is famous today because it had been tattooed onto the scalp of a slave, who then grew his hair back to avoid detection by Darius. Histiaeus' only instructions to the slave were to go to Aristagoras and have him shave his head. Following this, Aristagoras began rallying all the conquered cities of Ionia to join him in his fight against Persia. He expelled many tyrants and gave the citizens equality before the law as a way to motivate them to join his army. He captured many Persian commanders, including Choes, Darius' most valuable advisor in the Scythian campaign. This begins what is known today to historians as the Ionian Revolt. As mentioned, Histiaeus had his own reasons for urging his cousin to revolt. He thought the only way Darius would allow him to return to his city was if he was needed to go to restore the peace. Aristagoras, however, treated it as a legitimately intended rebellion and went to Sparta to try to get more powerful allies. Herodotus explains to us how Cleomenes I, who is not the most sane person in the world, came to be the king of Sparta, before telling us how Aristagoras' plea for help was rejected. "I order you to leave Sparta before sunset. You are not saying anything attractive to the Lacedaemonians if you want them to travel 3 months' journey away from the sea." Aristagoras next went to Athens to ask for help. We haven't talked about Athens in a while, so Herodotus gives us a little bit of background on them. Prior to this, the Athenians were in constant internal power struggles. They had ousted tyrant after tyrant, first Pisistratus, then Hipparchus, and Hippias, only to have 2 other of their leading citizens competing for power. One side of that conflict called in the Spartans to help, but the common people ended up ousting the Spartans in favor of their preferred leader. And then, to help protect themselves from these now enraged Spartans, some of the Athenians had asked the Persians for help. They hastily, and without consulting their fellows, agreed to provide Darius with earth and water. Meanwhile, the army that had come to Athens, led by Sparta, ended up disbanding spontaneously. A number of the leaders became convinced that they were no longer acting rightly. Free of internal struggles and ruling themselves democratically then, Athens flourished. Herodotus goes on. Now, the advantages of everyone having a voice in the political procedure are not restricted just to single instances, but are plain to see wherever one looks. For instance, while the Athenians were ruled by tyrants, they were no better at warfare than any of their neighbors. But once they had got rid of the tyrants, they became vastly superior. This goes to show that while they were under an oppressive regime, they fought below their best because they were working for a master, whereas, as free men, each individual wanted to achieve something for himself. Athens had grown so powerful for this reason that the Spartans and their allies discussed the merits of acting to forcefully reinstall their former tyrant, Hippias, who was still alive, as a way to make sure they would not become as much of a threat. After the Spartans made their case for doing this, Socleus of Corinth responded with an impassioned speech reminding all the Greeks present of all the excesses that tyrants engage in, using Cypselus and Periander of Corinth as examples. "It's a topsy-turvy world if you Lacedaemonians are really planning to abolish equal rights and restore tyrants to their states, when there is nothing known to man that is more unjust or bloodthirsty than tyranny. You have never experienced tyranny. If you had the first-hand experience, your proposals on this issue would be better than they now are. Cypselus forced large numbers of Corinthians into exile. Large numbers had their property confiscated, but by far the largest number lost their lives. Periander corresponded with the tyrant of Miletus, who advised him to kill outstanding citizens, and from then on he treated his people with unremitting brutality. One day he had all the women in Corinth stripped naked. That's what tyranny is like. These are the kinds of deeds it performs." This speech was successful in convincing the Spartans and their allies to send Hippias away. Instead of seeking help from these Greeks to become tyrant of Athens, Hippias then went to Darius. Darius ordered the Athenians to take Hippias back as their tyrant, and the Athenians refused, which amounted to a declaration of war. And that leads us to the present moment again. It was at this exact time that Aristagoras, the Ionian, arrives in Athens looking for help in his fight against Persia. He used the same arguments as he used with the Spartan king, including the promise of treasure in Persia. The Athenians agreed to help. Herodotus comments then that it is apparently much easier to fool a whole group of people than it is to fool one person. Next, Aristagoras incited the Paeonians, the people who Darius had deported, to flee and return to their homeland. This was to annoy Darius more than anything else, but it worked. Then, the Ionians with their Athenian allies attacked Sardis. They were ultimately repelled, but not before a fire got out of control that burned many of their homes as well as a temple. The Persians pursued the Greek force responsible all the way to Ephesus, where the Ionians were soundly defeated in battle. The Athenians returned home at this point, but the Ionians knew that they were too committed to stop fighting now. Darius was briefed about the burning of Sardis. He instructed his servants to tell him 3 times a day, before each and every meal, "Master, remember the Athenians." Next he summoned Histories, who was the tyrant of Miletus, the center of the rebellion, and also his advisor, all at once. Histories managed to convince the king that he had no involvement or foreknowledge of the rebellion prior to Darius telling him about it. He asked to be sent back to Miletus, from where surely he could restore peace, subdue any rebelling states, and deliver the ringleader Aristagoras to Susa for judgment. Darius believed him and let him go. Lies for profit. Meanwhile, a Persian called Artabius marched out with a large army to fight the Cyprians on land and the Ionians at sea. Several allies of the Cyprians turned traitor in the middle of the fight, and so they were reduced to slavery. The Ionians were defeated at sea as well. 3 sons-in-law of Darius, including Otanes, one of the 7 original conspirators, divided up the conquered cities and the loot amongst themselves. 2 of these 3 died in the midst of subsequent conquests, as the Carian people continued to fight for quite some time. But in the end, Otanes continued onward, capturing even more Ionian cities. Aristagoras tried to flee and found a colony in Thrace, but the Thracians killed him upon arrival. The rule of a monarch is not exclusive to the Persians and the Egyptians. Absolute power corrupts wherever it is found. In the Greek cities they were called tyrants, and they were just as prone to cruelty and excess, as Socleus of Corinth tells us. Sometimes the threat of tyranny was enough to inspire evil deeds on its own. The Corinthians received an oracle about Cypselus, their tyrant, prior to his birth, and tried to kill him in the cradle. Greek tyrants tend to be desperate to hold on to power in ways that the Persian monarchs don't usually get the opportunity to show us. Socleus' story also includes how Periander routinely executed outstanding citizens of one kind or another to prevent them from rising up against him. Recall Histories in Book 4 saving Darius from the Scythians to prevent the people of Miletus from eventually deposing him as tyrant. In Book 5, he starts a war that he knows will not go well for his people, just so that he can return to the seat of his tyranny. Both Pisistratus and Hippias were ousted from Athens several times over the course of their lives, and at no point did they give up trying to return to their rule. In Hippias' case, he finally sought the help of Darius, willing to subject Athens to Persian rule as long as he could return to being the big fish of his own small pond. Pretty bleak. How else do interactions between Persians and their subjected peoples go? Well, let's take the Macedonians, who were expected to conform to the Persian customs, such as allowing one's masters to sleep with every woman in the house. Even though Alexander stops them, massacring every member of the Persian delegation in the process, he still has to appear to submit to Darius. He can't appeal to human rights or to the fact that the Persians asked for something that he could not give according to the Macedonian custom. No. He's expected to adhere to the Persian customs because now Darius is his master. If there's any kind of rebellion against him or against these customs of his, it has to be very subtle. After all, if he knows you opposed him, he will have his servants remind him to get back at you at every single meal. The Athenians asked the Persians for help protecting their freedom from the Spartan forces fighting against them, and the price is submission to Darius. It's very ironic. As we see, this means that Darius decides whether Athens remains a democracy or becomes a tyranny. He demands that they take Hippias back. Tyranny then has a corrupting influence then, no matter where it originates. What is the alternative? Herodotus does not give us a detailed breakdown of exactly what sort of system of government Athens had, only that everyone had a voice in the political process. There are only a few notable Athenians who are mentioned by name in Herodotus' text. There are several situations where you would expect a single individual to be credited with whatever happens, but Herodotus doesn't do that. Who was it that was sent to Darius to ask for assistance? Just some Athenians. Because they all have a voice, it doesn't matter. Who went to ask the Spartans for help in the Ionian Revolt? Aristagoras, the acting tyrant himself. He could only trust himself to ask for military aid. And fair enough, how many times have we seen some exiles from a tyrannized state gone out only to return with help liberating their home? Under Athens' system, the city flourished and became so powerful that the Spartans feared them and considered reinstating tyranny just to make sure they were less powerful. Remember that detail. The people are stronger, more powerful, when they are free rather than not, at least according to them. Notice also that the urge to engage in or submit to tyranny comes from fear, and can come from anywhere. This is not a distinctly Persian problem, it's a human one. Notice one more thing from the Spartans' debate with their allies. When they suggested tyranny, Socrates comments how backwards that is for them. Ordinarily, they're against it. It is not just Athens that understood the problems with tyranny, many Greeks did. Even those with kings, like the Spartans, still had laws and constitutions and councils in place to prevent outright tyranny, as Herodotus has told us back in Book 1. Giving earth and water meant slavery to the king, and abolition of whatever laws or customs you had that get in the way of that, in favor of his, as we see many times in this book. And now that the Ionians and Aristagoras have been subdued, the king is coming for the Athenians. Again, there are a few main takeaways. Pay attention to the distinguishing factors between freedom and slavery, or really, tyranny of the monarch and rule of law. Conquered peoples are expected to adopt Persian customs in their interactions with them, both politically and socially. Tyrants must consistently choose against the good of their people to remain in power. Solon's mantra still holds, whether it's the constantly shifting regimes in Athens, the allegiance and the relationship of Histiaeus with Persia, or the deported Paeonians that ended up returning home after all. Freedom makes a people more formidable and is better for their flourishing. Tyranny can arise from any people, with many of the same abuses. Thank you for watching Book 5. I hope you enjoyed it. Please join me next week for Book 6.